I was actually part of the cohort that they sent to USP Lewisburg. And if there's any questions, I'll probably just try to answer them now. There was no notification, first and foremost, that we'd be leaving. I got called out of my bunk when I was in the CTF, actually, during the RSAT program, which is the Residential Substance Abuse Treatment Program. So I was receiving treatment at CTF. Um, and at 10 p.m. that night, November 9th, 8th, they called me to medical for an appointment, for a temperature check. They didn't tell me why. And then the very next morning at 4 a.m., they forcibly removed me from my cell in CTF in treatment, didn't tell me why, and told me that I was going to be transported. Once I got down to intake and receiving, they told me that I'd be going to USP Lewisburg. That was the case for the majority of inmates, including inmates from the insurrection that were housed at CTF. It was our understanding that only inmates from the Central Detention Facility would be moved, not the Central Treatment Facility would be moved, because they had standard ratings. So many of us were caught off guard. When we got to Lewisburg, the conditions were just as bad. I took my time to kind of look back and just to kind of shed light on how it wasn't a fix, and if I'm happy about what the United States Marshal Service did. I'm very thankful that the government finally responded, but there's no follow through. There was no plan of action. They just sent us to Lewisburg, where there's a history of civil cases and lawsuits that they've lost. There's the last time I think that the CIC did because they do reviews and reports on BOP institutions that we go to for DC residents, was 2018. They were complaining about deplorable conditions. So they just moved a body of people as like a quick fix. I think I'm going over my time, but those are my various thoughts about that.
Helpful. And so and were they ever transferred? Any of those people transferred back?
Yeah. So the day before I was transferred on the 18th, I believe, which was I forgot what day it was. Two of us were transferred, and the day before another two were. So I'm only aware of four who were transferred back. But kind of again shed some light. Even the January 6th insurrectionists were trying to get back to DC jail because of how bad the conditions were. I mean, we were there for a week and we still hadn't had any phone calls to our attorneys, no phone calls to family members who didn't even know that we'd been transferred.
Wow. So let's move. Talk a little bit more specifically about what are the current conditions in the jail? I mean, is the jail unsanitary, for instance? Are people put in solitary confinement, and if so, for how long? What are the interactions between correctional officers and the incarcerated people like? I think people would really like to know more about those particular questions. So maybe Russell, you can start us off on that.
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, the jail is as advertised. Sadly, it is a place of trauma. It is a place of danger. Um, it's a place of carelessness and neglect. I guess I'll start with the physical conditions. You've heard about the flooding, constant flooding in cells by the sour drains, the backflow of sewage, the smells. Blood may stay on the floor for up to 24 hours of the day following an assault. The doors are easy to pop open. Everything that you've heard about the meals are served cold and congealed. But again, I like to point that my biggest thing is that a lot of times when we think about the jail, we think about the physical conditions and what's a quick fix to, okay, we'll do this. But we're forgetting that these are just things that the people operate the jail, so the treatment is the biggest thing I want to focus on, because the physical conditions are bearable if the treatment was better. When CEOs are cursing at you and threatening you and not handling simple requests with professionalism, it makes your experience as an inmate, guilty or innocent or whatever you believe you are, it just makes it that much worse. You're arguing over toilet tissue. You're begging officers to get you a new tray if you didn't get a diet tray. You may not eat that day if they just think that you're lying, and they won't hesitate to tell you that they think you're lying, or other people lied to them, so they think they're lying to you. Um, it's just a constant. It just feels like you're in a constant conflict. I mean, a CEO who's been written up 12 times, in a week, can come back and just change the entire mood of all 120 inmates in the unit, based on how they're acting. And they don't hold anybody accountable. There's no accountability from captain to lieutenant to sergeant. Um, I mean, I just don't know what to say. It's so bad. It's dehumanizing, and there's no help. You just kind of feel like you're hanging on every day. Um, for your sanity, really, until you get out. So imagine when returning citizens come home to the community, the uphill battle they already have to face, but also being under trauma for months to a year at end. I think these are some of the things that you don't hear as often. You may hear about the paint chipping and this, that, and the third, but when you think about not being able to get a response for an inmate grievance process, or maybe they don't even have an inmate grievance form for you for 2 days, and you have a grievable issue that's impacting your health. Oh, but COVID is here, and you're short staffed, and you have no way of accessing things, and it's already a tough system to navigate, and you're treated like um, so inhumanely. Um, it's sad, and we have to get people out. Sorry.
Just a follow-up question one of the people online asked about a little bit more detail about when you mentioned blood on the floor. It took 24 hours. So this was because of an assault. Was it an assault between two inmates, or between a correctional officer, or all the above? Just a little bit more detail about that.
Yeah, so the reason that there's blood on the floor is because somebody's stabbing somebody, right? It's no secret. You can walk in the Northwest 2, which is Northwest 2 and Southwest 2. You hear it throughout the jail, but you really hear Northwest 2, Southwest 2. You hear sharpening of knives and cutting of desks throughout the night, throughout the day and night. COs hear it, they don't want to do anything about it. So there's constant knife sharpening in the jail. Everybody, I mean, you may go into a unit, there's probably 20 to 30 knives on each and every unit. Um, Most times where somebody is stabbed, it is inmate to inmate violence. Um, and it will only stop when those inmates cease to stop. Most times there'll be a code called, and it may take COs maybe 5 minutes to respond. The COs just stay in the bubble, where they are, and everybody's kind of at risk. I've seen inmates even this past time getting wheeled out, right? The inmates getting wheeled out with what looks like a concerned injuries, right? Injuries that you would be concerned about. And even lieutenants are sitting there and they'll say something like, "Oh, he got stabbed up pretty bad, huh?" Or they effed him up. Or, so there's just no, and so there's anyway, there's drops of blood on the floor, they're dry, and then to get maintenance to do it's a big deal. So that's kind of the situation you're looking at.
You mentioned food. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the quality of the food, or the lack of quality of the food. And then I would like also, if anything you could say about medical care.
Yeah, medical care. Yeah, so food's easy to tackle. It's just poor quality food. It's trash. It's often served cold. There's no nutritional balance. Um, no vegetables. I mean, I don't expect anything to be, farm to table, but even what they recommend daily for adults, 2, 3 servings, or just an apple a day, you're not getting. You're just getting cold pasta and soy. Um, in terms of medical care, I will say that in my experience, the sick call system does work. Um, Most times within 24 hours, you're being seen within, if not within 48 hours. I would just say that the care that is provided um, at the sick call again is not the best. Sometimes there's the follow-up after a sick call to go see a primary physician or see a specialist doesn't happen. You have to follow up yourself. So there's no really like continuum of care once a issue is found. Um, there's no mental health care in the building. I mean, they have a unit if we want to talk about mental health as well as physical health. They're just I guess not equipped to handle the needs of the population. They just prove that there's not a lot of therapy available, and there have been individual therapies available. And I'm sure COVID limited some of that, limited some of the services provided, but overall, physical health care, you know, they do respond, and mental health care needs a lot of help.
Kareem, maybe could you tell us how often, how much solitary confinement is used and what the average length of stay is in solitary? Do we know that how it's used in the jail?
I'll say this, right, because the time that a person spends in solitary confinement is not uniform. It's, it's premised upon whatever type of disciplinary infraction that an individual may have gotten. And so that kind of dictates how long a person may be in the shoe. You have different things. A person may go down there for a stabbing or a fight, or maybe some type of insolence or things like that. So things will vary based upon the severity of the incident, or they got different codes for the incidents, code such and such or code such and such. And it'll tell you that this right here, if you're convicted in front of the adjustment board, which is the housing authority that see you when you go to the shoot for the incident that you were charged with, then you're going to be given this amount of time in shoot. Oftentimes, without that, you may have individuals who are in the shoe for 30 days or more just under the pretense of an investigation without having a disciplinary report, or you may have individuals that's in the shoe for their own protective custody, right? They may request to go there, for their own safety reasons. And then you have, just other individuals who may be down there for suspicion of different things, but more times than not, it's because a person then incurred some type of disciplinary infraction. And based upon that disciplinary infraction, and they are found guilty when they see the adjustment board, that would dictate how much time they would spend in the shoe.
So just translate shoe to people here who may
Okay,
not
that's the special housing unit. Some people say solitary confinement, but it's the special housing unit.
know the many euphemisms used for that.
And if I can just add to that, on top of protective housing and disciplinary housing and investigative housing, the jail has also been on lockdown 22 out of 24 hours a day for most of the last 2 years. They had started letting people out of their cells more and just locked down again because of COVID. So really, if you're looking at solitary confinement by the international definition, which is less than 2 hours out of cell a day, then everybody at the jail has been in segregation for the last 2 years. The Council for Court Excellence is part of a coalition that's investigating solitary at the jail right now. I can say we filed a pretty detailed FOIA request in September. And we're still fighting with DOC to get a response to that. So we really don't have a very clear idea of how widespread the use of segregation in all of its different forms is in the jail, and how much it's been used in the last few years.
Something that hasn't changed over time. So does this, can ask either Pat or Karine, does the CIC ask for that kind of information when they do their review of the jail?
Which specific information are you talking about?
Average, how many people are put in solitary during the year, what the average length of stay is for the different kinds of solitary, that kind of aggregate information.
So we we get like, they don't do like a daily census because of the fluctuation in the population, right? But we get, I have it right here. Give me a second. We get, give me 1 second.
While Kareem's looking for that, let me explain that what Kareem's responsibility is at the CIC is to do a quarterly inspection of the jail. So the CIC is in the jail quarterly, if not more often, because we also do one-on-one visits, but we're in there minimal quarterly. And Kareem, wasn't one of the current reports, recent reports, focused on a good bit on the medical isolation?
You said the medical isolation?
Yeah.
No, but it was focused on the SHU. It
Oh,
was
we talked about
focused
SHU.
on the special housing unit. And what I'll say is, like, to Pet's point, like, we try to go in there quarterly. For a time, we wasn't able to go in there due to COVID. And once things kind of got worked out, or they kind of got a handle on that, we were able to go back in there. So just a few months ago, we went in there twice. One was for an actual site visit, and then the second time was for an actual inspection. And the areas that we inspected was 1 general population unit and 2 special housing units, right? And some of the things that we seen down there, is published in our report, but just basically highlighting the conditions down there. You had guys down there that didn't have mattresses in their cell. They had been down there for like 72 hours, still didn't have a mattress. You had cells down there that was flooded. You had individuals down there that wanted to file grievances, didn't have access to grievance forms, and things of that nature. So we highlighted all of that stuff in our report that was published. As far as on average, throughout the year, usually what we'll do is when we go, depending on what complaints we receive from the jail, so that things are not redundant, what we like to do is, based upon the issues that we are hearing from the population, whether they're in the SHU or whether they're in general population, that kind of dictates the premise of what it is that we're going to go and do or be looking for once we come inside the facility. Based upon whatever complaints we're hearing from the population, their families, their loved ones, their support system, whoever it may be, and then that's kind of, what we premised our on-site inspections of when we actually go into the facility. And if so happen we're going to actually visit the SHU, then we'll get the numbers for the SHU in conjunction with just the population as a whole. But we haven't specifically requested throughout the year how many people was in the SHU.
I see. And is that the follow-up? Is that a policy of the CIC, or just is there a reason why you don't ask that?
Say that again.
Is there a reason why you don't ask for that information?
It's not necessarily a reason. I'm trying to find because they give us information of the population and where individuals are housed that are where they at, and so we can take that information and, based upon that, do our own numbers to see how many people may have been in the SHU throughout the year.
Yeah. But it sounds like it's not readily available. It sounds like you have to do some work to get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me move on. I do want to have some time for questions from our audience. If you could, those who have questions, please put them in the chat, and then I can relay. I can choose some of them after I finish up with my questions. But I'd like to move on. So, what should change in the jail, I guess, is a overall question. And is it just a matter of better leadership? What is the role of the political establishment, et cetera? as far as what should change in the jail. Maybe Emily could start off on that.
So CCE facilitated the district task force on jails and justice over the past 2 years. And this task force was composed of 26 members who really covered the gamut. People who were either formerly or currently incarcerated at DOC, people who are in government decision-making positions, people who are, policy researchers, who are direct service providers on the ground. And they worked for 2 years. They gathered information from more than 2,500 DC residents and really put together a comprehensive vision for what the future of DC's criminal legal system should look like. Because unfortunately, this is all tied together, right? You can't fix one piece of the system and expect things to go great without touching the other pieces of the system. And that's something that we've really seen consistently with the history of the jail, the physical buildings of the jail themselves, right? You build a new facility and then the same thing happens. It falls apart, it becomes overcrowded, conditions get really bad because the system around it isn't changing. And so the task force made 80 recommendations last year that fit into a 10-year plan to really transform DC's justice system. It starts by changing policies to decarcerate. So making sure that we have fewer people going to jail, staying for shorter periods of time in jail and prison, and especially targeting racial disparities, making sure that we are making anti-racist policy that is focused on really minimizing as much as possible the overrepresentation of Black people as they're incarcerated in DC right now. And then in the next phase, planning to build a new facility so that you can knock down first CDF, which is by far the worst of the two institutions, build part of the new facility, move people around, knock down the second part, CTF, have your new facility there. And the goal is to have to cut the population that DC incarcerates by at least a third, but really up to half is the goal, so that we have space here in DC for everyone who is still incarcerated to be in DC in one general location. That means that for the first time in 20 years, we'll get to stop using Federal Bureau of Prisons facilities. Everyone can be here near their family, near their services, near their connections, and we get to control what happens, right? We get to control what happens in the DC jail. We don't get to control what happens in Lewisburg or what happens in these other places. And so we want to make a facility where there is focused on safety and rehabilitation, and that is really a completely different environment from what we have now. And that is possible. We have a plan laying out the systems change that it'll take to get there, but it requires a lot of focus and a lot of prioritization, right? We need to really focus in on conditions and culture. Like Russell said earlier, the conditions are the easiest to fix out of all of this, right? You have to look at DOC staff and at DOC residents in the culture and make sure that you're shifting the approach that we're taking to interactions in the detention facility. We have to get people out of the facilities. We're able to cut our jail population by a third at the height of the initial pandemic. But the population has ticked back up. We haven't been staying on top of that. We haven't been as diligent, and we need to get more people out of jail. We have a plan for doing that safely. And then finally, we need to plan to move on this new facility because it's a $500 million investment, and it's going to take time and money to plan. And the sooner we get started, the sooner we can get rid of what we have now.
And I infer from what you said is that we haven't gotten started. Is that correct?
So the city put $1 million in to start thinking about planning. We have this plan that's ready, and we really some policy changes have happened. So for instance, the city invested record amounts of money in violence prevention this year and in reentry services because of the federal COVID funding that they were able to allocate that way. The city was also able to move some of the traffic response that MPD usually does that can lead to arrests into jail time over to the Department of Transportation instead. Similarly, they were able to move some of the crisis response that MPD has traditionally done over to the Department of Behavioral Health. So if someone is having a mental health crisis or some kind of substance use crisis, social workers can go instead of police. So we're seeing little bits and pieces, but we have not seen kind of the wholesale commitment to taking on the 80 recommendations as a whole and the priorities for moving them forward. The task force has drafted a bill and is hoping to get it introduced this year that would implement about 20 of the decarceration recommendations in law and change the standards for detaining people at DC jail and for releasing people from confinement. So that's one of the things on the horizon that we're looking to get moving quickly.
That sounds somewhat promising. There are all these subpopulations in the jail, right? Different kinds of cases waiting trial, is that right? And different kinds of courts, whether they're DC code violations or federal law violations, I guess. How do you attack that? And you said we need to reduce the numbers in the jail, and I guess is there a strategy for doing that that's politically acceptable, I guess?
I think so. And we'll have to figure out what the politics say, right? And that's part of hearing this out through council. But first of all, one of the things we know is that 20% of the people held in DOC custody are there because of violations of probation, parole, or supervised release. And the vast majority of those are not new arrests, not new crimes. They're technical violations, meaning they broke some rule of their supervision, which could be anything from, testing positive for substances, to not staying in contact with their supervision officer. The U.S. Parole Commission has jurisdiction over those people. We can't control that ourselves right now. But one of the big things that the task force is pushing for, and that many community advocates are pushing for, is for the U.S. Parole Commission to be shut down next year. And for DC to have a plan to start taking, it's this year now, it's not even next year anymore. In November to start taking on that jurisdiction ourselves so that we can make those choices for ourselves. So that's 20% of the population right there that we can make different decisions about who should be detained. The 2/3, so a full 63% of the people in jail are there for 5 reasons. 20% are there on violations, and then another 10 to 12% are there for simple assault, for drug crimes, for property crimes, and for weapons crimes. So there are huge categories there where, why are people being incarcerated on drug crimes? That's probably something that we can get a lot of agreement on, where people should be getting treatment in the community. What does it mean when you're looking at property crimes, at weapons crimes, at simple assault? In which places, were people actually harmed? In which places do we think, oh, this person probably needs to be detained in the short term, really to protect the safety of the community? And in which cases can we look closer and decide whether that's a decision? One of the things that our decarceration bill does is ask the judges to make individual determinations. So instead of just counting check boxes and saying, okay, it's this type of thing, it's this type of thing, they have this type of charge, they should be detained, actually looking at the person and having to say, I think that it would be unsafe to release this person, and making individual determinations for individual people. There are also, we have good time credits to let people out early. We have work release programs that aren't being used right now because the eligibility criteria are so narrow. And because we don't have a men's halfway house in the district at the moment, where DOC would release people who were on home confinement. And so there are a lot of small tweaks that we can make, some that have broad consensus and some that might be a little harder, but really that we can significantly change the population being held at the jail.
Russell, do you have anything to add to that?
About the changes in the jail in general, or reducing population? Yeah, I mean, in these states, I agree with. If we're investing so much money into reentry, so if we, you gotta look at it as a system, right? And everything has to work together. So we're investing so much into reentry programs and taxpayer dollars, and all this stuff is going into reentry programs. And we need to make sure that our returning citizens are prepared to enter those reentry services, right? What good is it to have all these good programs when you're spilling out traumatized people who have even less trust in the government, right? Less trust in society. you know, and facing the uphill battle. So it just needs to support rehabilitation, reintegration. I mean, we need to really look at what other countries are doing. I mean, do we need bigger windows? What environmental changes do we need to make? We need to look at just the basics of what a human is and what they need to not drive them crazy. And I mean, is that just giving them some more shelving? I mean, you guys would be amazed at how much just a little extra shelving would help, because, you know, that stops a correctional officer coming by your cell and you hanging your clothes up because that's the only way to dry, and then you possibly getting sent to the SHU, and then you kind of have to restart your rehabilitation process. Let's look at some training, some new certification requirements for staff. Should they have some type of training or education about this population, or education about this population and the demographics prior to coming in and serving that population in the community? Is there specific de-escalation trainings that we need to make sure? And then what's the oversight? I mean, how do we better oversee? I mean, we have a lot of reporting from CIC, even the United States Marshal Services now, right? But what's the follow-up? Was there a 2-week follow-up? You know, what's the timeline that we're expecting these things to be changed? Or is it just going to go to the wayside until next year there's another uprising or big issue, and then ACLU comes back in, and then we're kind of in this repetitive cycle? You know what I mean? What's the follow-up? Is it got to be an independent agency? How do we keep the gas on the pedal and through policy, right? But yeah, I definitely think that if the question is, do we need a new jail or not? Because, you know, inmates on the inside are, you know, we talk about it every day. We did, you know, what's new? Where's it going to be? I mean, these are things that we're thinking about. We're not even thinking about our freedom. We're just thinking about the conditions on the inside. So, you know, we're thinking about it. And I would say, from the experience of an inmate, we're motivated to want to do stuff in the unit. We just don't have the resources. Even if the detention facility mirrored CTF, you'd have better outcomes. Do we need to look at putting a mini library in each unit? You know, so people have ways to kind of self-direct their own, you know, coping skills or whatever the case may be, rather than waiting on case management. You know, what's the lived experience of inmates? We need to really dive into that so we can drive better outcomes. And how do we put the tools in place in in the jail, so we're able to do that and get the data needed to do better things. So
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm going to turn to some of the questions now in the chat. Here's one. If everyone is aware how overrepresented Black people are in jails in DC, and how inhumane the conditions are, who is opposing changing these systems? And what is their alleged reason, or what are their alleged reasons? Anyone want to chime in on that at all? I mean, where is the resistance to change? I guess might be one question I could put to Emily or to others here.
Kick us off from a kind of policy and politics perspective, and say that I think it's less that people are in opposition to change than that they are not motivated to do anything. Our criminal legal system, I mean, the systems everywhere are tangled, and DC's system is even worse than most. We have more different authorities, you know, more players in the mix, more confusion, less information, and it allows people to get away with not doing anything. I'm going to share in the chat right now the link in case people are interested in following up and reading more about the task force's plan. But, you know, it got significant media coverage when it was released, and we did briefings for all of the major government agencies and their staff and different public institutions. I think went to like 40 different organizations last year to present on this information. And, you know, next month it'll have been a year since the publication. It's now what, 2 months since the Marshall's inspection, and that got a ton of local coverage and a ton of national coverage. And still, we really haven't seen, other than, like Russell said, they moved some people out to Lewisburg, they moved some people back, but what has fundamentally changed? And so one of the things that I would suggest people do, we just learned that the Department of Corrections oversight hearing at the DC Council is going to be March 2nd of this year. And if you're concerned about these issues, I would really, really encourage you to sign up to testify, or at the very least to submit testimony. You can submit written, you can submit a voice recording or a video recording if that's easier for you. And I'll drop the email address in the chat. But the more people that they see are paying attention to this issue, the more likely we are to see some action. And so we really need collectively people coming together to make sure that this is at the top of the agenda, because it's not an easy fix. It's not impossible, but it's not easy. And it's going to take a lot of attention and real prioritization to get things done here.
Questions about independent oversight. I know there is, the CIC is one way there is oversight. They make reports about conditions in the jail. But is there a need for a separate body that would have some kind of real authority to make changes, to have oversight over the jail? And do the panelists have any opinion about that?
So I think that so as far as our agency, we are an independent agency to provide this oversight in the DC Department of Corrections. The thing of it is that when we do these reports, first of all, we don't have enforcement power. And it doesn't diminish our ability to do the work, because we're still able to provide, the public with information that people might not otherwise be able to get absent us being able to go into these facilities and get this information. However, our role is kind of limited to being able to get this information based upon the things we see, analyze the data, make recommendations, and do our reporting. From that point, it's on our governing officials to take the information that we provide and say, we're going to do this, that, and the third. We're going to make sure this, that, and the third. So then it moves from our agency to our elected officials. You know what I mean? And I think that, it's the same thing with, like, I'm not for jails at all, but I understand we live in a society of laws and people going to break laws, so you got to have somewhere to send them. But even in I don't think it's so much that people are resistant to the building of a new jail and stuff like that, but it's a matter of, the public being more involved and pushing our elected officials to make this happen, because it's something that has been talked about for years and years and years and years and years. And it's always just a conversation, but nothing realistically has ever been done to say that we're going to do this. And then when you get to talking about what a location may be at and things like that, people don't want a jail and they close to where they live at. It's almost like the same thing with halfway houses. Don't nobody want no halfway houses in their community. So what you imagine the public is going to say about a jail being built somewhere in their community. So, we just got to be realistic about these things. And if this is something that as our society, we really want to see, then we got to get the public more involved and engaged into actually making this a reality. And then we push our elected officials to make it happen, because this is a big deal. And it's not something that's just that simple. Like, they were saying, this is a $500 million investment. You have to get rid of the old and come in with something new. This is a big thing. So if you don't have mass support from the public and they're pushing the public officials to do what the public is saying that they want, if this is something in fact that they want, then that's something, it's just going to continue to be a conversation as opposed to it becoming a reality. And a lot of times we have these conversations, but that's all they be is conversations, as opposed to really mobilizing and organizing and trying to get people to push. Because if the public don't push, then the elected officials ain't pushing.
And the employees know that as well. And that's a behavior shift that you have to set expectations and demand and reward if there is good behavior. If you want change, it has to be from the top to the bottom, right? Because culture eats strategy for breakfast. We can have the best strategy, but if But if we're not changing the culture, we will fail.
Right. So you're saying it's a combination of leadership as well as public pressure.
It has to come from, it has, yeah. Everybody has to be supporting it,
So
including
there
the,
is information in the chat about the signing up for this March 2nd oversight committee hearing of the jail. And so I signed up this morning actually to give testimony. So I hope other people will do so as well. It means you must understand that if a lot of people then sign up, you have to wait around a lot. But since it's virtual, you can wait around in the comfort of your home these days. So it's not as bad as sitting there. But I think it is important, and I agree that a lot of people should come up to that hearing to indicate that the public really is concerned about how people are being treated in the jail and how and the conditions in the jail and about the lack of leadership in many ways in the jail. So I think all that needs to be said at this hearing, as well as reflecting on some of the complexities that face criminal justice in the district, which I think more people need to learn more about, because that's a fact of life here. And so there are these different systems coming together that need to be navigated, I guess is the best word for it.
and manage.
Yeah. Okay, I think, please look at, I think we're winding down to 1 o'clock now. I really want to thank our panelists, Emily Tatro and Russell Rowe and Kareem McCraney for participating today. It was really very helpful to hear your remarks. And I'm really pleased by the number of people who attended this particular conference. So thank everyone. I was able to record most of the session, so we'll put that up on our website if you want to refer to it in the future. So, and that'll most likely be up on our website sometime next week. So I want to wish everyone a good day. Thank you for attending. We do plan IHR's next program will be on February 2nd. And we'll switch our focus to Maryland, our legislation in Maryland and in Virginia about solitary confinement. So IHR is advocating for 2 different bills, one in Maryland and one in Virginia. And we'll give a report, an update on how the progress of that legislation, and talk about in general the issue of solitary confinement in Maryland and in Virginia. So that'll be February 2nd I believe it'll be at 6 o'clock in the evening. So thank you so much. Wish everyone a good rest of the day.
Take care.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you all very much.